not only been using biblical justification as well as their fraud understanding of history to emphasize their rights, as archaeology is also being used for the same justification. For instance, Warren Reinsch article dated October 26 in 2018, which appeared on the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology website, mentions the significance of the Merneptah stele found in 1896 in Thebes or modern-day Luxor in Egypt, especially regarding this 3,200-year-old document, which suggests at the time of its inscription, the nation of Israel was an established power and not a nomadic people who had just recently entered the land of Canaan. Merneptah was the 13th son of Ramses II. Although his life was overshadowed by his father, many Egyptologists suggest that Merneptah was both a co-ruler and the real power behind the throne in the last few years of Ramses's life. His military campaigns are recorded on 3 separate ancient inscriptions, with the victory stele of Merneptah as one of them. With 25 readable lines written in hieroglyphics, the inscription recounts Merneptah's conquest of the land of Canaan. Part of the inscription reads, "Canaan is captive with all woe. Ashkelon is conquered. Gaza seized. Yanoam made non-existent. Israel is laid waste, bare of seed." Reinsch claims that before the discovery of the stele, many dated the Exodus much later, but now they are forced to reconcile with the fact that Israel was already an established power in Canaan in 1207 before Common Era. However, his conclusion relies on an anachronistic, self-fulfilling interpretation that conflates two entirely different historical definitions of Israel. Biblical minimalists, secular historians, and linguists critique this specific argument for several key reasons. The first relates to the completion of people and land. Reinsch argues that the monument proves the nation of Israel was an established power and not a nomadic people. However, his conclusion that this establishes a continuous 3,200-year presence in the land of Israel ignores ancient Egyptian grammar. The hieroglyphic marker in the inscription places a specific symbol or a determinative next to foreign city-states like Ashkelon and Gaza that meant land or nation with bounded territory. Next to the word Israel, the inscription explicitly switched to a different determinative meaning, a foreign ethnic group or people without a fixed city-state. Therefore, when Reinsch claims that a 13th century BCE text mentioning a nomadic or semi-settled tribal group proves the 3,200-year continuity of Israel as a modern nation state is a textbook example of projection. Secondly, Reinsch is not right to link total destruction to established power. The monument is a standard piece of royal Egyptian propaganda designed to exaggerate a pharaoh's dominance. Reinsch interprets Israel is laid waste, bare of seed as a text boasting about the near extinction and total defeat of a group of people as proof that they were a dominant established regional power. The mainstream archaeologists do not value the monument because it proves Israel was a superpower. They value it simply because it is a baseline receipt. It acts as a timestamp, proving that a distinct cultural entity calling itself Israel existed somewhere in the hills of Canaan by roughly 1208 BCE. Finally, when evaluating claims like this, it is crucial to consider the context of the platform. The Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology operates from a perspective of biblical maximalism and literalism. Their explicitly stated goal is to use material culture to validate the historical timeline of the Hebrew Bible. Because their starting premise assumes the biblical narrative is literally true, Their interpretations of artifacts like the Merneptah stele will inherently lean toward confirming that bias. This creates the exact self-fulfilling loop that many people notice. So I think you need to emphasize on this self-fulfilling nature of the article by Ranch. Nonetheless, the claim that the Merneptah stele prove a 3,200-year Israeli connection to the land, as argued in the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology article by Ranch, is supported by biblical maximalists or Christian apologists and nationalist groups who use the artifact to validate a historical indigenous connection. Conversely, this interpretation is rejected by mainstream secular archaeologists, biblical minimalists, and Palestinian scholars who argue that the text represents an ancient nomadic group and that utilizing it for modern land ownership claims is an unscientific distortion of history. Unfortunately, the majority of Israelis have been indoctrinated from an early age about this Zionist propaganda through its education system. Yet, Israel accuses Palestinians of doing the same thing, which is arguably just reinforcing the facts on the ground about the actual history of how the Jews have stolen their land and oppressed them until today. Critics, including progressive Israeli academics, journalists, and international observers, argue that the state-approved Israeli curriculum functions to legitimize Jewish claims to the land while minimizing or erasing Palestinian history. One of the first key elements of this critique involves the biblically rooted claim. Textbooks heavily emphasize the ancient Jewish connection to the land of Israel, framing the establishment of the modern state in 1948 as a return to an ancestral homeland after centuries of exile. Secondly is the omission of the Nakba. Since 2009, Israel's Ministry of Education has largely banned or restricted the use of the term Nakba, or the catastrophe, referring to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in 1948 in state textbooks. Critics argue this omission creates a blind spot regarding the historical cost paid by the Palestinian population. Finally, it concerns the convenient erasure of the Green Line. Many geography and civics textbooks used in Israeli schools omit the Green Line, which is the 1967 Armistice Line, presenting Israel and the occupied West Bank as a single geographic entity, which critics argue normalizes the settlement enterprise. The Green Line refers to the 1949 Armistice Demarcation Line. It was established at the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, serving as the de facto border between the State of Israel and its neighbors, including the Jordanian-administered West Bank and Egyptian-administered Gaza Strip, until the Six-Day War in 1967. Under international law and United Nations resolutions such as the UN Resolution 242, any territory under Israeli control beyond the Green Line, specifically East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, is recognized as occupied territory. The Green Line remains the internationally recognized baseline for any negotiated two-state solution. The visual and conceptual erasure of the Green Line from the Israeli public consciousness was a deliberate institutional choice. Months after the 1967 war, the Israeli Security Cabinet issued a directive to remove the armistice line from official state maps. In the late 1970s and 1980s, the Likud government formalized this policy, enforcing a ban on the line to signal a long-term goal of integrating the West Bank. By completely omitting the Green Line from geography, history, and civics textbook, the Israeli education system normalizes the occupation. It fundamentally alters the way the majority of Israeli citizens perceive the geopolitical reality in profound ways, including the normalizing of the greater Israel landscape, rendering Palestinians invisible, erasing the concept of occupation, and hardening public resistance to peace framework. Over the years, we have seen this direct condemnation as well as accusation by Israel towards Palestinians, especially regarding how Palestinians were stereotyping and educating their children in school with rhetorics about Israel being the oppressor and so on and so forth. But if you look on the other point of view, you can also see that conversely, Israel, alongside international watchdog groups like IMPACT-C or the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education, and several Western governments frequently accuses the Palestinian Authority and uh, UNRWA schools of inciting hatred and promoting anti-Semitism. But IMPACT-C has often been accused of equating standard expression of Palestinian national identity and history with racial hatred. UNRWA has also repeatedly rejected IMPACT-C's findings, accusing the group of utilizing smoke and mirrors and sensationalized reports to garner attention and intentional damage and intentionally damage the reputation of refugee education programs. In 2021, for example, when the European Union commissioned Germany's prestigious George Eckert Institute, or GEI, to conduct an independent study on Palestinian textbooks, IMPACT-C publicly attacked the GEI's findings. The GEI responded by accusing IMPACT-C of making false and one-sided accusations and employing unjustified polemics that violate standard scientific practices. So the argument goes on. The only way out is to study the actual history so that we can understand better.